Daniel Carter signed away the only woman who had ever truly loved him before his coffee even turned cold. The divorce papers lay between them on the kitchen table, sharp and white against the worn wooden surface Emily had polished by hand the night before. Outside their small apartment in Portland, Oregon, rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers, but inside, the silence was heavier than any storm. Emily Whitmore stood across from him in a pale blue sweater, her hair loosely tied back, her face calm in a way that should have made Daniel hesitate. But he did not hesitate. He had spent weeks rehearsing this moment, convincing himself that this was not cruelty, this was ambition. He was 34 years old, running out of time, buried under business debt, and tired of introducing his wife as someone who worked part-time at a neighborhood library and drove a 12-year-old sedan with a cracked taillight. That morning, he did not see the woman who had packed his lunches when he worked 16-hour days. He did not see the woman who sat beside him through failed investor meetings and smiled like she still believed in him. He saw only what he thought she lacked: money, status, connections, a last name that opened doors. He pushed the papers closer and said, "Emily, I can't keep building my future around someone who has nothing." For 1 second, something flickered in her eyes, not shock, not anger, but disappointment so quiet it almost looked like mercy. She glanced at the black leather purse resting beside her chair, where a sealed white envelope waited inside. Daniel had no idea that envelope held documents prepared for him, documents that could have cleared his company's debt, brought in new investors, and changed his life before lunch. Emily had planned to give it to him that morning. She had planned to tell him the truth about her family, her name, and the reason she had lived so simply for 3 years. Instead, she placed one hand gently on the edge of the table and asked, "Are you sure this is what you want?" Daniel picked up the pen. "I've never been more sure." Then he signed. And Emily, without begging, without crying, without raising her voice, quietly took back the envelope he never knew existed. Emily did not leave the apartment right away. She moved through the room slowly, as if she were walking through a museum of a life Daniel had already decided was worthless. In the bedroom, she folded 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of jeans, and the cream-colored scarf Daniel had bought her during their first winter together, back when he still noticed when her hands were cold. She did not take the framed photos from the dresser. She left behind the picture of them at Cannon Beach, the one where Daniel had sand on his shoes and hope in his eyes. She left behind the mug that said "Best Husband," even though she had bought it at a grocery store for $6 when his first client finally paid him. She left behind the little things that proved she had been there, because Daniel had made it clear that proof no longer mattered. From the kitchen, she could hear him moving around as if nothing sacred had just ended. A cabinet closed. A chair scraped. His phone buzzed twice, then again. Emily already knew who it was. Vanessa Blake had been texting him for weeks, always at the wrong times, always with messages Daniel tilted away from the table. Emily had never searched his phone. She never needed to. Daniel's face had changed before his habits did. At first, it was small. He stopped laughing when Emily made simple dinners after long workdays. He stopped telling her about investor calls. He stopped asking if she wanted to ride with him to office events. Then one night, when she came downstairs wearing a navy dress she had saved for a company dinner, Daniel looked at her and said, "It might be better if I go alone. These people are different." Different. That was the word he used when he meant richer, louder, polished in ways he had started to admire. Emily remembered standing by the apartment door with her coat in her hands, pretending the sentence had not cut deeper than it should have. She had smiled and told him to have a good night. He had kissed her forehead out of habit, not tenderness, and left before noticing she had already curled her hair. That was how their marriage had begun to disappear, not in one dramatic storm, but in 100 quiet removals. Daniel stopped saying wife and started saying Emily. At networking lunches, he mentioned he was married only when someone asked. At holiday parties, he introduced her quickly and moved on before anyone could ask where she worked. Once, at a rooftop event downtown, a man in a tailored gray suit asked Emily what industry she was in. Before she could answer, Daniel laughed lightly and said, "She is not really part of all this. She keeps life simple." The man smiled politely. Emily smiled too, but Daniel never saw her eyes. If he had, he might have noticed that she was not embarrassed. She was studying him. She was learning exactly who he became when he thought she had nothing to offer. 3 years earlier, Daniel had been different. He had met Emily on a rainy afternoon inside the Portland Central Library, where she volunteered during a children's reading program. He had come in soaked from the rain, carrying a folder of rejected loan applications and a dream he was too proud to admit was failing. Emily had helped him find a quiet table, brought him a paper towel for his wet sleeves, and listened when he started talking about his small logistics software company as if it were already worth millions. She never mocked him. She never asked what kind of car he drove or how much money was in his account. She asked what problem his company solved, why he cared, and what kind of man he wanted to become if it succeeded. Daniel had looked at her then like she was the first person in the world who had seen him clearly. Back then, he loved her plain cotton dresses, her thrift store books, her old sedan with the cracked taillight. He said she made life feel honest. He said rich people made everything complicated. He said he wanted a marriage built on loyalty, not image. Emily believed him. Or maybe she wanted to. Because Emily Whitmore had spent most of her life surrounded by people who valued last names before character. She had grown up behind iron gates in a family estate outside Seattle, where dinner conversations included mergers, foundations, trust funds, and names printed in financial magazines. Her father, Charles Whitmore, had built Whitmore Global from a regional investment firm into one of the most respected private holding companies in the country. Her mother had taught her how to sit through charity galas without letting anyone see exhaustion. By 25, Emily knew how to identify fake smiles, borrowed confidence, and people who praised kindness only when it came with money. So when she left that world for Portland, she did it on purpose. She took her grandmother's last name off most public documents, used a modest apartment, drove a used car, and worked quietly at a library and community literacy nonprofit funded through a private trust no one connected to her. She was not ashamed of wealth. She was cautious about what wealth revealed in others. Daniel had once seemed like the exception. He was ambitious, yes, but his ambition had been warm then. He wanted to build something useful. He wanted to hire people who had been overlooked. He wanted his mother, Margaret Carter, to stop worrying about money. Emily respected that. When his company nearly missed payroll in their first year of marriage, he came home pale and silent, sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. The next morning, an anonymous bridge loan came through a community business fund. Daniel cried in relief. Emily stood behind him with one hand on his shoulder and said, "Maybe someone believes in you." He never asked who. 6 months later, when a larger investor backed out 2 days before a major software launch, another private grant covered the gap. Daniel called it a miracle. Emily called it timing. She watched him celebrate, watched him promise he would never forget the people who stood by him when he had nothing. But people often make their most beautiful promises before they are tested. The more Daniel's company grew, the more he began to hate the version of himself Emily had loved. He traded his old truck for a black luxury sedan he could barely afford. He started buying suits on credit because he believed confidence had to be visible from across a room. He followed entrepreneurs online who spoke about cutting off anything that did not match your future. He repeated their phrases until they sounded like his own thoughts. Elevate your circle. Protect your image. Never let small-minded people slow you down. Emily noticed, but she waited. She had promised herself long ago that she would never reveal her name to force someone to value her. If Daniel loved her, he would love her before knowing what Whitmore meant. If he did not, the truth would only buy obedience, not devotion. Margaret Carter made that test harder. Daniel's mother was not cruel in a loud way. She was worse. She was polite enough to deny every insult. At Sunday dinners, she asked Emily if she had ever considered getting a real career. At Thanksgiving, she said it must be relaxing to have no major responsibilities. When Daniel announced that his company had been invited to pitch a national retail chain, Margaret raised her glass and said, "Now you need a wife who can stand beside you in serious rooms." Daniel had laughed nervously. Emily had looked at him, waiting for him to correct her. He did not. After dinner, in the parking lot, Emily asked, "Do you agree with her?" Daniel sighed as if she was making things difficult. "You know how Mom is." "That is not what I asked." He opened the car door and looked away. "I just think appearances matter more than you understand." That was the first night Emily almost told him. Not because she wanted to win an argument, but because she wanted to save him from becoming a man he would one day despise. She imagined saying, "Daniel, my father is Charles Whitmore. The fund that helped your company was mine. The doors you were chasing have been open beside you the entire time. But she swallowed the words because his answer mattered more before he knew. Love that requires proof of status is not love. It is negotiation. So Emily kept showing up as herself. She packed his lunches, proofread his presentations, listened to his fears, and signed quiet approvals through her family office whenever his company faced a crisis he did not know was being softened from behind the curtain. She gave him chances. So many chances. The final one came the morning he signed the divorce papers. Inside the white envelope in her purse was a full partnership proposal from Whitmore Global Foundation's Economic Development Branch. It included debt relief, expansion capital, and access to national clients that Daniel had spent years chasing. Emily had planned to tell him everything over breakfast. She had even practiced the words in the bathroom mirror before sunrise. I wanted you to know me before you knew my name. But Daniel spoke first. He chose his future, or what he thought was his future, with a pen stroke and a sentence he could never take back. Now as Emily zipped her small suitcase, she looked around the bedroom one last time. Her phone lit up with a message from her father's office. Ms. Whitmore, the gala confirmation is complete. Your introduction is scheduled for 8:30 tonight. Emily closed her eyes, not from fear, but from the strange calm that comes when heartbreak finally becomes clarity. Daniel thought she was walking out with nothing. He did not know she was walking back into a world that had been waiting for her return. Daniel did not follow Emily into the bedroom. He did not ask whether she had somewhere to go, whether she needed help with her suitcase, or whether 3 years of marriage deserved more than a signature and a quiet exit. He stayed in the kitchen with his phone in his hand, staring at a message from Vanessa Blake that arrived almost the moment Emily disappeared down the hallway. Big night ahead. With a charcoal suit. Trust me, Daniel. After tonight, you will not have to worry about small things anymore. Daniel read the message twice, and instead of feeling ashamed, he felt relief. That was what Vanessa gave him better than anyone else. Permission to believe his selfishness was strategy. She never called it abandoning his wife. She called it protecting his future. She never said Emily was unworthy directly. She only smiled and asked little questions that left poison behind. Does she understand the level you are trying to reach? Does she know how investors judge a man by the woman beside him? Do you really want to walk into rooms full of millionaires with someone who looks like she still clips coupons? The first time Vanessa said something like that, Daniel had defended Emily. Weakly, but he had defended her. He had said Emily was kind, grounded, loyal. Vanessa had tilted her head and replied, "Those are wonderful qualities for a quiet life. But you are not trying to build a quiet life, are you?" That sentence stayed with him longer than it should have. Vanessa Blake had entered Daniel's world at a downtown Founders Mixer 6 months earlier, wearing a cream blazer, carrying a designer bag, and speaking with the effortless confidence of someone who had never once wondered whether a card would decline. She introduced herself as a strategic consultant with connections across private equity and philanthropic investment circles. Daniel had been standing near the drink table, trying to look more important than he felt, when Vanessa approached and said she had heard of his logistics platform. He was surprised. Most people at those events forgot him as soon as he finished talking. Vanessa did not. She asked sharp questions, repeated his company mission back to him with cleaner words, and told him the product had potential if he stopped presenting himself like a man still asking for permission. Daniel laughed at that, but he remembered it. Within 2 weeks, Vanessa had introduced him to people he had only seen in business articles. She invited him to private lunches, investor breakfasts, rooftop receptions, and one charity dinner where the cheapest silent auction item started at $5,000. Each time, Daniel returned home more distant. Emily noticed the new names in his stories, the careful way he described rooms where she had not been invited, and the glow in his voice whenever he mentioned Vanessa. He never said Vanessa made him feel successful, but Emily heard it in every word. Vanessa was everything Daniel had started to think success looked like. She knew which restaurants had private entrances, which venture partners liked flattery, which older executives preferred handwritten notes, and which nonprofit boards existed mostly to make wealthy people look generous. She made Daniel feel like he was being educated in a secret language. The more she taught him, the more ordinary Emily seemed to him. At home, Emily still asked if he had eaten. Vanessa asked if he had closed. Emily asked if he was sleeping enough. Vanessa asked if he wanted to be remembered. Emily folded laundry while listening to his worries. Vanessa sat across from him under soft restaurant lighting and told him he was bigger than his current life. What Daniel did not understand was that Vanessa was not investing in him. She was using him as a doorway. For months, Vanessa had been trying to get close to Whitmore Global, especially its foundation branch, which was rumored to be launching a major economic development initiative across the Pacific Northwest. The initiative would fund mid-sized companies with community impact, exactly the kind of program that could lift Daniel's business into national attention. Vanessa knew Daniel's company might qualify, but she also knew he had no direct access to the Whitmore family. That made him useful, but incomplete. She believed if she positioned herself beside him at the right time, she could take credit for shaping him, package his company as her discovery, and walk into Whitmore Global as the consultant who brought them a promising deal. Daniel thought Vanessa saw greatness in him. In truth, she saw a ladder. Emily had understood Vanessa's type from the first photograph Daniel carelessly left open on his laptop. Vanessa had the polished smile of someone who measured people in usefulness. Emily had met women like her at charity auctions since she was a teenager. Women who praised your dress while looking over your shoulder for someone richer. Women who called themselves friends until a better connection entered the room. Emily never confronted Daniel about her. Not because it did not hurt, but because confrontation would have given him an easy excuse. He would have accused her of jealousy. He would have said she was insecure. He would have turned the issue into Emily's fear instead of his disloyalty. So she watched. She watched him start using phrases Vanessa used. She watched him replace his old humility with rehearsed confidence. She watched him come home from meetings and inspect the apartment like it embarrassed him. One evening, Emily had made chicken soup because Daniel had been coughing all week. He walked in late, saw the pot on the stove, and sighed. I already ate with Vanessa and some investors. Emily turned off the burner. You could have texted me. It was last minute. Most things are when you do not want to explain them. Daniel looked annoyed. Please do not start. I had an important night. And this is not important? She asked, gesturing softly to the table set for two. He glanced at the bowls, the folded napkins, the little candle she had lit, and for a moment, the old Daniel almost appeared. Then his phone buzzed. Vanessa's name flashed across the screen. His face changed. I need to take this, he said, already walking away. That was the night Emily stopped hoping love alone would remind him. By the morning of the divorce, Vanessa's influence had become a voice inside Daniel's head. When he told Emily she had nothing, he was repeating a belief Vanessa had carefully fed him piece by piece. When he signed the papers, he imagined Vanessa's approval. He imagined walking into the gala that evening free, unburdened, ready to be introduced as the kind of man who had finally chosen ambition over sentiment. After Emily left the apartment, Daniel opened his closet and reached for the charcoal suit Vanessa had chosen. It still had the tailor's tag hanging from the sleeve. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the jacket, trying to ignore the empty space where Emily's small suitcase had been. He told himself the quiet felt like freedom. He told himself the ache in his chest was just guilt, and guilt was temporary. Success would make it fade. At 5:30, Vanessa's black car pulled up outside the building. Daniel stepped out carrying a leather portfolio filled with pitch materials. Vanessa lowered the window and gave him a slow, approving look. There he is, she said. That is the Daniel Carter I knew was hiding under all that hesitation. He smiled because he needed the compliment. When he climbed into the car, Vanessa noticed his bare left hand. You did it. Daniel looked down at where his wedding ring had been that morning. It is done. Vanessa reached over and briefly touched his wrist, not with affection, but with satisfaction. Good. Tonight is about clean narratives. Investors do not like complications. Daniel nodded, though the word complications landed strangely. Emily had been his wife, his first believer, the person who stayed when there was nothing impressive to stay for. Now she had been reduced to a complication. The car moved through Portland traffic toward the Pearl District, where the Whitmore Global Gala was being held inside a renovated historic hall with high glass windows and a view of the Willamette River. Vanessa spent the drive coaching him. Stand tall. Do not over-explain. Mention scalability before community impact. Complement the foundation's regional work. If Charles Whitmore attends, do not ask for money first. Ask about legacy. Daniel listened carefully, unaware that Emily had heard men rehearse those same lines around her father for years. Vanessa checked her lipstick in a compact mirror and said, "There are rumors the Whitmore heir will finally appear tonight. Nobody has seen her publicly in years. If we can get even 5 minutes with her, everything changes." Daniel looked over. Her. Charles Whitmore's daughter, Vanessa said. Brilliant, private, supposedly very selective about who she trusts. Some people say she walked away from the family business because she hated the politics. Others say she has been quietly controlling the foundation from behind the scenes. Daniel frowned slightly. What is her name? Vanessa snapped the compact shut. No one in my circle knows for sure. The family keeps her protected. But that is why tonight matters. Daniel looked out the window as the gala lights came into view. For one passing second, he thought about Emily's face when she asked if he was sure. He pushed the memory away. He was done with small rooms, old cars, and a wife who made him feel tied to the man he used to be. Tonight, he believed, he was stepping into the life he deserved. The car stopped at the entrance. Cameras flashed for donors, executives, and social figures Daniel recognized from magazine covers. Vanessa stepped out first, smiling as if she belonged to every chandelier above them. Daniel followed, straightening his suit, letting the noise and light convince him he had made the right choice. But across the street, unnoticed behind the tinted window of another car, Emily Whitmore watched him enter with Vanessa at his side. She wore a simple ivory coat over a gown Daniel had never seen, her hair swept back, her expression calm. Beside her on the seat rested the white envelope she had taken back from the kitchen table. On top of it was an old photograph of Emily as a little girl standing beside Charles Whitmore at a summer foundation event in Seattle, her small hand holding his, her last name already powerful enough to open every door Daniel had spent years begging to enter. Emily looked at the gala entrance, then at the photograph, and finally at the envelope. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply said to her driver, "Give him time to enjoy the life first." Then she stepped out of the car and walked toward the side entrance reserved for the Whitmore family. The gala hall looked exactly like the kind of room Daniel had spent years trying to enter. Crystal fixtures hung from the ceiling like captured stars. A jazz trio played near the marble staircase. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays, and every conversation seemed to carry the quiet weight of money, influence, and names that could change a person's future with one introduction. Daniel stood beside Vanessa near the entrance, holding a glass of sparkling water he had barely touched, telling himself to breathe slowly. His suit fit perfectly. His shoes were polished. His wedding ring was gone. To anyone watching, he looked like a man ready for the next level of his life. But inside, he was counting every mistake he could not afford to make. Vanessa noticed his tension and leaned closer, smiling for the room while speaking only to him. "Do not look impressed by everything. Look like you expected to be here." Daniel straightened his shoulders. Across the hall, a private equity partner he had met twice nodded in his direction. Daniel nodded back, pretending the gesture meant more than it did. Vanessa guided him from one cluster of guests to another, introducing him with careful precision. Daniel Carter, founder of Carter Logistics Systems. Regional infrastructure software. Strong growth potential. Community impact angle. She made him sound sharper than he felt. People listened, but not for long. Their eyes moved past him, toward older money, bigger names, people who did not need to explain why they belonged. Every time someone asked about his company, Daniel gave the answer Vanessa had rehearsed with him in the car. Every time someone asked about his personal life, Vanessa stepped in before he could stumble. "Daniel is in a season of transition," she said once, with a polished laugh. "The best founders usually are." Daniel smiled, but the phrase made his stomach tighten. A season of transition. That was what she called a marriage ending before breakfast. Near the center of the hall, a large screen displayed the Whitmore Global crest in silver and blue. Under it were the words, "Legacy Initiative Annual Gala." Daniel had read about the initiative for weeks. It was expected to fund companies in logistics, education, housing, and workforce development across Oregon, Washington, and California. One approval from the foundation could bring Carter Logistics Systems the kind of credibility banks and investors had denied him for years. He scanned the room for Charles Whitmore, but saw only board members, executives, donors, and security staff with discreet earpieces. "Where's the heir?" Daniel asked. Vanessa kept her smile in place, but her eyes were restless. "That is what everyone is waiting to find out." As they moved toward the stage area, Daniel caught a glimpse of someone disappearing behind a side curtain near the staff corridor. Ivory fabric, dark blonde, hair swept into a low twist. A familiar stillness in the way she walked. His breath caught. For half a second, the world narrowed. "Emily," he whispered. Vanessa turned. "What?" Daniel stared at the curtain. "I thought I saw." He stopped himself. It was impossible. Emily was probably in a rideshare by now, carrying her small suitcase to some friend's apartment, maybe crying quietly because she had always felt too much and said too little. She could not be here. Not in this room. Not behind a private entrance at a Whitmore Global event. Vanessa followed his gaze and frowned. "Do not get distracted tonight. You already made the hard decision. Now act like it was worth it." Daniel nodded, embarrassed by the sudden pull of memory. He lifted his glass and took a drink, though his throat felt dry. On the other side of the curtain, Emily stood in a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs from Whitmore Global's 50-year history. She could hear the soft roar of the crowd beyond the wall, the clink of glasses, the practiced laughter of people who wanted to be remembered. A staff member adjusted the microphone pinned near the podium. Another reviewed the final program with her. "Ms. Whitmore, your father is ready when you are." Emily looked down the hall. Charles Whitmore stood near a private doorway, silver-haired, composed, wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man who had learned long ago not to confuse silence with weakness. When Emily approached, his face softened. "I saw him arrive," Charles said. Emily did not ask who. "With her?" "Yes." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing the final confirmation like a door closing. Charles studied his daughter. "You do not have to do this tonight." "Yes," Emily said quietly. "I do. For revenge." She looked toward the curtain, where Daniel's voice briefly rose above the crowd as he spoke to a donor. "No. For the truth." Charles accepted that. He had never forced Emily back into the family world after she left it. He had not fully understood her need to live without the Whitmore name, but he had respected it. He had watched her build literacy programs, approve quiet grants, and redirect family wealth into communities that would never know who had helped them. He had also watched Daniel benefit from that generosity without once asking why miracles kept arriving at the exact moment he needed them. "The partnership proposal is still in your purse?" Charles asked. Emily's hand moved to the white envelope. "Yes." "Are you going to give it to him?" She paused. "I already tried." Charles's expression hardened, but only for a moment. "Then tonight, let him meet the woman he refused to see." Back in the hall, Vanessa had finally reached one of the people she had been hunting all evening. Martin Hale, a senior advisor connected to the Legacy Initiative. She touched Daniel's elbow and guided him forward. "Martin, this is Daniel Carter, the founder I told you about." Martin Hale was in his late 50s, with kind eyes and the guarded patience of someone constantly approached by people who wanted something. He shook Daniel's hand. "Carter Logistics. I believe your file crossed my desk." Daniel brightened. "Yes, sir. We have been developing routing tools for regional suppliers and nonprofit distribution networks." "Interesting work," Martin said. "Some concerns in the file, though." Daniel's smile tightened. "Concerns?" Vanessa gave a light laugh. "Every young company has growing pains." Martin looked from Vanessa back to Daniel. "Whitmore Global takes leadership character seriously. Financials matter, but so does judgment. So does loyalty to mission. So does how a person treats people when nobody important is watching." Daniel felt the words land in places he did not want touched. Before he could answer, the lights dimmed slightly. A soft chime sounded through the hall. Conversations lowered. Guests began turning toward the stage. Vanessa inhaled with excitement. "This is it," she whispered. The introduction. Daniel forgot Martin Hale. He forgot his glass. He forgot the uneasy feeling that had followed him since the apartment. The host walked to the podium under a narrow beam of light and welcomed everyone to the annual gala. He spoke about legacy, responsibility, and the future of community investment. Then the large screen behind him shifted from the Whitmore crest to a slow montage of libraries, small businesses, scholarship ceremonies, food distribution centers, and rural supply warehouses. Daniel watched politely at first. Then the narration began describing a private donor who had spent years funding overlooked founders and education programs across the Pacific Northwest under anonymous trusts. A woman who had chosen to live outside public view. A woman who believed character could only be measured when status was removed from the room. Daniel's chest tightened. The images changed. A children's reading program at the Portland Central Library. A community business fund. A bridge loan initiative for small technology companies. Daniel stared at the screen as recognition crawled through him. That library. That fund. That timing. Beside him, Vanessa whispered, "This is incredible. Whoever she is, she has been everywhere." Daniel could not answer. The host smiled, now holding a silver card. "For years, she asked us not to say her name. Tonight, as she steps into her new role, she has agreed that the work should no longer remain hidden." Daniel's fingers went cold around the glass. At the edge of the stage, behind the curtain, he saw the ivory fabric again. The same still posture. The same calm he had mistaken for weakness. Vanessa leaned forward, eager. Martin Hale looked directly at Daniel, as if he already knew the ending. Then the host said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new chairwoman of Whitmore Global Foundation, Emily Rose Whitmore." Daniel stopped breathing. The curtain opened, and the woman he had left that morning stepped into the light as the entire room rose to its feet. For several seconds, Daniel Carter heard nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat. The applause around him swelled like a wave, rising from every corner of the gala hall. But he stood frozen with the glass still in his hand, staring at the woman on stage as if the room had tilted under his feet. Emily did not look like a stranger. That was the worst part. She still had the same calm eyes, the same gentle posture, the same quiet grace he had mistaken for plainness. But under the lights of the Whitmore Global Gala, wearing an ivory gown that seemed made for the stage, with the entire room standing for her, she looked like the truth Daniel had spent 3 years refusing to see. Behind her, the giant screen displayed the words in silver letters. Emily Rose Whitmore, Chairwoman, Whitmore Global Foundation, Principal Shareholder, Whitmore Holdings. Vanessa Blake whispered. No, it was not loud, but Daniel heard it. Her confidence cracked on that single word. All evening, Vanessa had spoken about the Whitmore heir like she was a locked door they needed to open. Now that door had opened, and behind it stood the woman Vanessa had mocked, dismissed, and helped Daniel throw away before breakfast. Emily stepped to the podium, and the applause softened into silence. She did not search for Daniel. She did not smile at him. She did not give him the satisfaction of seeing whether he had hurt her. She placed both hands lightly on the sides of the podium and looked out over the room as if she belonged to every inch of it. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady enough to carry to the back of the hall. "For many years, I believed the most honest way to understand the value of privilege was to live without announcing it." Daniel felt the words pass through him like cold air. Vanessa slowly turned her head toward him, her face pale beneath the soft lights. "You were married to her," she said under her breath. It was not a question. Daniel could not answer. His mind was moving backward too fast, dragging him through every moment he had misunderstood. Emily in the library, helping him find a quiet table when his loan applications had been rejected. Emily in their first apartment, eating store-brand soup with him and laughing like it was a feast. Emily staying up until 2 in the morning to review his investor pitch, circling weak sentences with a blue pen and telling him his idea deserved a cleaner voice. Emily standing in the parking lot outside his mother's house after Margaret implied she was not suitable for his future. Emily asking him that morning, "Are you sure this is what you want?" And Daniel, proud and blind, saying he had never been more sure. On stage, Emily continued, "When we remove titles, money, and reputation from the room, we learn quickly who values people and who only values access." A quiet murmur moved through the guests, the kind that happens when a sentence sounds graceful in public but cuts sharply in private. Daniel looked down at his left hand. The pale mark from his wedding ring was still visible. He curled his fingers into his palm. Martin Hale stood a few feet away, watching him with an expression that was not surprise, but confirmation. That hurt more. Martin already knew. Maybe half the foundation team already knew. Maybe the only person in the room shocked by Emily's name was the man who had shared her kitchen table for 3 years. Emily spoke about the Legacy Initiative, about investing in companies that served real communities, about literacy, logistics, education, and the quiet dignity of working families who were too often ignored until wealthy people needed a story to tell about them. Daniel heard words he had used in his own pitches, phrases Emily had helped him sharpen, ideas she had once encouraged when he still wanted his company to matter beyond profit. The screen behind her shifted again, showing photographs from programs the foundation had funded. A rural warehouse network, a mobile reading van, a small business rescue fund. Daniel's mouth went dry when he saw the name of that fund. It was the same fund that had saved his company during its first payroll crisis. He remembered the email from years ago, the official language, the anonymous donor designation, the exact amount arriving one day before he would have had to lay off 5 employees. He remembered coming home and lifting Emily off the floor in relief, spinning her in the kitchen while she laughed, and told him maybe someone believed in him. Someone had. She had. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice sharp now. Did you know? Daniel shook his head, but even that felt like an accusation against himself. No, how could you not know your own wife was a Whitmore? Her whisper carried panic, not sympathy. Daniel looked at her then and realized Vanessa was not thinking about Emily's heartbreak, or his marriage, or the cruelty of that morning. She was calculating damage. Her eyes kept moving between Emily, Martin Hale, and the board members near the front. She was measuring how badly this revelation had wounded her access. For the first time, Daniel saw Vanessa the way Emily must have seen her from the beginning, polished, strategic, and empty where loyalty should have been. The applause rose again as Emily finished the first part of her speech. Then she paused, letting the room settle. This year, she said, Whitmore Global Foundation will expand our partnership program to support founders whose work strengthens the communities around them. But support is not simply a financial decision. It is a question of trust. We will ask not only what a company builds, but what kind of person is building it. Daniel felt Martin Hale's earlier words return with painful clarity. Leadership character, judgment, loyalty to mission, how a person treats people when nobody important is watching. Nobody important. That was what Daniel had thought Emily was, not important enough to impress, not connected enough to respect, not wealthy enough to keep. He had treated her worst when he believed she had no power, and now the entire future of his company rested in the hands of the woman who had seen every part of him without the costume. Emily's gaze moved across the room at last. It passed over donors, executives, reporters, and board members. Then, for the briefest moment, it met Daniel's. There was no triumph in her eyes. That almost ruined him. If she had looked smug, he could have hated her. If she had looked furious, he could have defended himself. But she looked calm, almost sorrowful, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time too. Not as the man she married, not as the dreamer she once believed in, but as someone who had been given love without a price tag and still asked for a receipt. Daniel stepped forward without thinking. Vanessa grabbed his sleeve. Do not, she whispered. Not here. He pulled gently away, but Martin Hale moved into his path before Daniel could cross the room. Mr. Carter, Martin said quietly, this is not the moment. Daniel swallowed. I need to speak to her. I imagine you do. Martin's voice remained polite. But Ms. Whitmore has a schedule this evening. Ms. Whitmore. Hearing another man say her name with respect made Daniel feel smaller than any insult could have. Vanessa forced a smile and stepped beside him. Martin, surely this is just a personal misunderstanding. Daniel's company should still be considered on its merits. Martin looked at her for a long second. Personal decisions often reveal professional risk. Vanessa's smile faltered. Around them, the room had begun to shift. People were looking at Daniel with recognition now, not because he was important, but because whispers moved quickly in rooms like this. The divorced husband. The founder who did not know. The man who arrived with another woman on the same night his wife became chairwoman. Daniel could feel the story forming around him, and for once he had no control over the narrative. On stage, Emily stepped away from the podium as Charles Whitmore joined her. Daniel had seen Charles only in articles, standing beside governors, university presidents, and chief executives. Now he watched Emily's father kiss her cheek gently and place a proud hand on her shoulder. That small gesture struck Daniel harder than the title on the screen. Emily had a family, a legacy, a world large enough to swallow every room Daniel had been chasing. Yet for 3 years, she had chosen a small apartment, secondhand furniture, and quiet dinners with him. She had chosen to be beside him before he became anyone, and he had punished her for arriving without a spotlight. The formal program ended, and guests began moving toward the reception area. Emily stepped down from the stage, immediately surrounded by board members and donors. Vanessa tried to recover, smoothing her hair, lifting her chin, preparing to approach as if confidence could erase what had happened. But before she could take one step, an assistant approached Daniel with a small cream-colored card. "Mr. Carter," the assistant said, "Ms. Whitmore asked that this be returned to you later this evening." Daniel stared at the card. His name was written across the front in Emily's handwriting. Not the hurried handwriting from grocery lists or rent checks, but the careful script she used when something mattered. "Return?" he asked. The assistant gave a professional nod. "She said you would understand after the keynote." Vanessa leaned in, trying to see, but Daniel turned the card slightly away. For the first time all night, he did not want Vanessa inside the moment. He opened it with unsteady fingers. Inside were only 2 lines. The envelope was meant for breakfast. "Now it will be delivered after the board review." Daniel read the words once, then again, feeling the floor disappear beneath him a second time. The envelope. The one in Emily's purse. The one she had taken back when he signed the divorce papers. He looked across the room and saw Emily standing beside Charles, speaking to Martin Hale. Martin handed her a file with the Carter Logistics Systems logo visible on the corner. Daniel's company. His application. His future. Emily did not look over this time. She opened the file, read the first page, and her expression gave nothing away. Daniel finally understood that the reveal was not over. Her name had only been the beginning. Daniel waited until the applause faded, until the photographers lowered their cameras, until Emily stepped away from the brightest part of the room and entered the quieter corridor near the private reception suites. He followed at a careful distance, no longer feeling like a founder at a gala, no longer feeling like a man with a plan. Every step reminded him of the morning, of the pen in his hand, of Emily asking one last time if he was sure. At the end of the corridor, 2 staff members moved aside for her without question. Daniel called her name before he could lose his nerve. "Emily." She stopped, but she did not turn around immediately. That pause was small, maybe only 2 seconds, but it felt longer than the 3 years he had spent taking her for granted. When she finally faced him, her expression was composed, almost gentle, and that made it harder for Daniel to speak. "I did not know," he said. It was the first sentence he found, and the worst one he could have chosen. Emily looked at him quietly. "No," she said. "You did not." Daniel stepped closer, keeping his voice low because several executives were still passing behind him. I did not know who you were. I did not know about Whitmore Global, or the foundation, or the grants. I did not know any of it." That was the point. Her answer was calm enough to sound rehearsed, but Daniel knew her well enough to hear the pain underneath. "I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Vanessa appeared at the far end of the corridor, watching them with a nervous smile that did not reach her eyes. Emily saw her too. Daniel turned slightly, embarrassed by Vanessa's presence in a way he had not been embarrassed by Emily's heartbreak that morning. "She does not matter," he said quickly. Emily's eyes returned to him. "She mattered enough for you to bring her here." The sentence landed without volume, without insult, and still Daniel felt it expose him completely. "I was confused," he said. "I was under pressure. The company has been unstable, and I thought if I could just get into the right rooms, meet the right people, become the right version of myself." "You decided the right version of yourself needed to be unmarried." Daniel swallowed. "I made a mistake." "No," Emily said. "You made a choice. A mistake is when you take the wrong exit on Interstate 5. A choice is when you look at the person who stood beside you through debt, rejection, and failure, and decide she is embarrassing because her coat is not expensive enough." He looked down, unable to defend himself against the accuracy of it. Emily's voice did not break, but it softened in a way that made every word worse. "You did not leave because you misunderstood me, Daniel. You left because you understood exactly what you thought I was. Poor, ordinary, unconnected, and in your mind, that made me disposable." Behind him, Vanessa approached with careful steps. "Emily, I owe you an apology," she said, sweetening her tone as if the right voice could polish the truth. "I had no idea who you were, and I truly regret anything that may have seemed disrespectful." Emily turned to her. "You regret not knowing who I was. That is different." Vanessa's face tightened. She glanced toward Martin Hale, who had entered the corridor holding Daniel's company file. The legacy initiative should not be affected by personal history, Vanessa said. Carter Logistics has real potential. It does, Emily replied. That is why the file reached final review. Daniel looked up sharply. Final review? Martin Hale handed Emily the folder. She held it in both hands, the Carter Logistics Systems logo facing Daniel like a mirror. Your product is useful, Emily said. Your employees are talented. Your community distribution model is strong. That is why my foundation supported your company twice through anonymous channels. Daniel's face changed. You were the donor. I was your wife, she said. The donor was just the part of me you would have respected sooner. For the first time that night, Daniel had no words at all. Emily opened the folder and removed a single page. The board will continue reviewing Carter Logistics Systems. Your employees should not suffer because of your character. But you will not be the face of any partnership with Whitmore Global. Not now. Vanessa lost her composure for a moment. That is excessive. Emily looked at her with perfect stillness. No, it is due diligence. Martin Hale nodded once. Daniel understood then that Emily was not destroying him. She was doing something colder and fairer. She was separating the company's value from his ego, protecting the people who worked for him while refusing to reward the man he had become. He took a step toward her. Emily, please. Can we talk somewhere private? Not about the company. About us. She studied him, and for one painful second, he thought he saw the woman who once waited up for him with soup on the stove. There was an us this morning, she said. You ended it before breakfast. I was wrong. You were honest. The corridor fell silent. Emily reached into her purse and took out the white envelope. Daniel recognized it instantly, even though he had never known what it contained. She placed it in his hands. This was meant to be a gift, she said. Now it is just evidence of what you lost. Then she walked past him toward the private reception, leaving Daniel with the envelope, Vanessa with nothing to say, and Martin Hale watching like a man who had just seen a verdict delivered without anyone raising their voice. Daniel stood in the corridor long after Emily disappeared behind the private reception doors. The envelope felt heavier than paper should have felt. Vanessa said his name once, then twice, but he barely heard her. His fingers moved slowly under the flap, opening what Emily had tried to give him before he chose pride over loyalty. Inside was a formal partnership proposal between Whitmore Global Foundation and Carter Logistics Systems. The first page outlined immediate debt relief. The second offered expansion funding across Oregon, Washington, and California. The third listed introductions to national partners Daniel had spent years trying to reach. At the bottom, beside Emily's elegant signature, was a blank line reserved for him. His throat tightened as he read the handwritten note clipped to the final page. I believed in the man you were before the world impressed you. I was ready to build beside him. Daniel closed his eyes, but the truth did not disappear. That morning, he had not rejected a poor woman. He had rejected the only person who loved him before his name meant anything. Vanessa looked over his shoulder, saw enough to understand, and quietly stepped back. There was no apology left that could restore what the papers represented. Across the hall, through the glass doors, Daniel saw Emily standing beside her father, speaking with calm confidence as board members listened. She did not look broken. She did not look back. When the reception doors opened, warm lights spilled into the corridor, and Emily walked out surrounded by people who knew her worth without needing her to prove it. Daniel took one step forward, then stopped. For the first time all day, he understood that some doors do not close loudly. Some close with a signature, a silence, and a woman finally choosing herself. He had divorced her because he thought she had no future. But her real name had always been the future he was begging to enter.